Okay, today we have a very awesome interview. I'm excited about that. And on Twitter, you may know him as QTR, and his name is Chris. Chris has built a large, multiple hundreds of thousands of person audience in the finance and in kind of as an economic commentator, even talking more about gold. You talk about stocks, the stock market. And you've also interviewed all types of amazing individuals. You even interviewed one of my heroes, Ron Paul.
Yeah.
So it's great to have you on.
It's nice to be here, dude. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I got to ask the first question. Why is it QTR? Why is it Quoth the Raven? Why is that your name for your financial brand?
That's a really good question. And there's no real good explanation for it. Back in 2012, I started to write on my own. I started to kind of blog on my own, which is how I got started. And I was working for a company at the time. And when I started to blog, I needed to blog under a pseudonym because I didn't want people that were at my job to know that I was kind of writing also on the side. And it wasn't a huge deal. It wouldn't have been a big deal. I just preferred to do it under a pseudonym. And once I started to understand the capital markets a little bit better and really became far more critical, not just of the markets as a whole and our monetary policy as a whole, but of individual companies, the cloak of anonymity affords you the opportunity to avoid a lot of blowback and bullshit that is, it's a fact of life if you want to go out and criticize companies and individuals that are worth tens of millions, if not billions of dollars. So I was a lit major. I always liked Edgar Allan Poe. I think the day that I was signing up, I first started writing for a site called Seeking Alpha a long time ago. And when they had first gotten started, if you wanted to open an account with them, you wouldn't just go online and fill out a form or whatever. You actually had to call somebody. I remember being on the phone with them and telling them, hey, I want to write under a pseudonym. Can you set me up with an account? And they were like, what do you want your name to be? And I must have had some shit on my desk or something, some Edgar Allan Poe shit on my desk, or I don't really know. I don't know. But somehow Quote the Raven was there because that's from that poem, The Raven. And I just said, yeah, whatever, Quote the Raven, and they were like, okay. And they filled it. I'm not expecting that fucking 8 years later, I'm going to be interviewing Ron Paul on a podcast. And I just figured this would be okay for now, for at least for me to be able to express my opinions on a couple of things and do it anonymously, which I thought was important. But I never, you never think it's going to be this big thing. And then all of a sudden you do a finance podcast and it's called Quote the Raven, and people have no clue why it's called that. And you wind up explaining this like I'm explaining it now before I even start talking about anything.
So here's one thing that I think's very interesting about you. Normally, when I do the interviews, you just kind of drop right into just like finance and why the world was screwed and whatever. And what's very fascinating about you is you're kind of sounds like there's a lot of people that they want to do something they're passionate about for a living. Yeah. And especially I think when you are involved in economics, I've noticed being in the personal development industry, there's a lot more heavy vibe in this kind of finance economic industry. A lot of people feel powerless and things like that. And you kind of went out there and then you ended up creating this big business and audience, and you support yourself through it. And you were just some guy that was just, you said you were working another job at the time. That's a pretty cool story. What were you doing before?
I was working, so I had a job where I was working investor relations for a company, a public company, a startup public company. And for people that aren't familiar with finance, what the job of an investor relations person at a company is to essentially, as a public company, when you're listed on a stock exchange, you have a responsibility for reporting certain things to the public market. So the SEC mandates that every company that's publicly traded has to make the same type of information available. And the investor relations professional essentially is the liaison between taking that information and kind of breaking it down into layman's terms for a lot of the investors. They're also the person that helps garner investor interest in a company, If you need to raise capital, they help, go out and find investors to raise large amounts of capital. They schedule the annual general meeting and set things up like that. So on the company side, I worked very closely with the CEO, the CFO, our securities attorney. You spend time looking at individual SEC filings and reading and writing and revising annual reports and a lot of boring shit like that.
Sounds like I would throw up.
What's that?
Sounds like I would throw up.
Yeah, I found it interesting because I was passionate about the company at the time. So for me, I was able to do it, and it played to a lot of my strengths, which were always writing, reading comprehension, stuff like that. And then the ability to take a lot of jargon and break it down to the layperson that didn't want to, if you're an investor in a company, you don't want to sit down and read fucking 300 pages of an annual report, which of course nobody wants to do. You call an investor relations professional and you say, hey, what is your company's procedure for recognizing revenue? And the person's going to be able to tell you, okay, well, we book the revenue when the cars reach the dealership, but not when they're sold from the dealership. This way you don't have to, go through all these documents and read everything. And that's the gist of that job. So that kind of got me on my way.
Interesting. That's probably what's made you also really successful in this niche, and it's allowed it to be full-time, is there's so many people like me that are just dummies, and you communicate in a way that makes you feel like a real person, as opposed to this super genius guy that went to Harvard that I can't relate to at all. And I think that's probably why you've done a good job building a mainstream audience.
The problem with the industry is that it's cloaked in a lot of jargon and bullshit and nonsense for a reason. And so once I started to feel my way around the industry,
what's the reason? To manipulate us so we don't know?
Well, the reason is to pull the wool over people's eyes. I was actually just talking about this on my podcast the other day, and talking about this modern monetary theory and from a macro perspective. Once I figured out how public companies worked, I was like, okay, well, this is a lot of bullshit. And then I figured out how macroeconomics worked, and I was like, this is a much bigger serving of bullshit. This is a heaping of bullshit until eventually I figured out enough about fractional reserve banking and central banking to understand that it's really the longest con ever pulled in human history, and probably the biggest con ever pulled in human history. When you figure it out, you can't help but think that if everybody in the world just understood how it worked, there would be fucking riots. So when I started to kind of put that stuff together and piece it together, I felt like I had to say something. It wasn't like I had gone through my whole life and dreamt of being a financial commentator. Like, I wanted to be fucking Billy Joe Armstrong from Green Day. I wanted to be Tony Hawk. I wanted to be starting center fielder for the Philadelphia Phillies. I didn't want to be some fucking guy talking about, Keynesian theory versus Austrian economic theory. Inflation is a tax that people don't even realize. Like, I don't want to fucking be that guy, but I became super passionate about it. And it just kind of like, it just found me. And to go back to a point we were just talking about, the jargon is there because it's like one of those flame retardant walls in a building. It stops the truth from making its way to the public, because you have what's going on, which is the Federal Reserve printing all this pornographic amounts of money and widening the inequality gap and really redistributing people's purchasing power and taxing people through inflation, which they don't even realize. And then you have this wall where all of this terminology doesn't quite get through to, my friends who are guys that I train jujitsu with, who are welders, who are fucking linemen that repair the phone lines. They're just normal guys,
Right.
And the shit doesn't get through to them. And it's built like that for a reason,
You're right. That's really why I made this. I've got enough stuff to do with my business and the personal development industry. I really made this because I wanted to learn more myself. And then also, you're right. It is a jargon that keeps people, and it really is the greatest con in the history of mankind. It really, truly is. But before we get in there, there's a lot to unpack that you said here. In the first note that I took while we're kind of going with the flow of some of the things that you had mentioned, let's talk about MMT and this is important also for our generation, right? Because there's a lot more 50 plus year olds that maybe hear this type of thing you said and they agree with. But then I want to also speak to people that, are following like AOC and Bernie, and
Sure.
they're more in our generation, because that's a real problem, is our generation needs to understand this. And you were kind of dissing MMT. So first of all, what is it? And you were you're about to go in that direction. And I thought that'd be a good place to start, since it's trending right now.
A simple way to describe MMT is this idea that the central bank can monetize a lot of debt that we have outstanding and print money essentially without consequences. That's really the best way to put it. I mean, maybe some of the people that listen to your show know that the dollar was taken off the gold standard, decades ago. And that gold and silver used to really be dollars, and they were replaced with Federal Reserve notes, which were essentially promises to pay dollars. And then we've debased the currency from anything tangible. So now when you have a dollar, you don't really have a claim to anything. You just have a sheet of paper. That's it. Which is why so many people that are critical of central banking want to own gold and silver, because gold and silver have these, multiple thousand-year track records as economic instruments. They've been used going back as far as, barter and exchange of goods has been happening because of the properties that they have, because they're stores of value. And the MMT idea is that we can make a clean break from that. I mean, we've already tried to do this effective several decades ago. And worse than that, that we can print money and pay for things like we're doing now with the CARES Act. The government is distributing people money, but it's money that is coming out of thin air. They're printing it. And the idea is that we can do that ad infinitum to solve all of the country's problems and all of the world's problems, and that nobody will call us on it, and hyperinflation is not going to be an issue, and that we can kind of depart from all of these very simple economic laws like sound money, like supply and demand, like price discovery. So we can kind of fix the economy. We can manipulate interest rates, which is really the price of capital. It's the cost of capital. So if somebody wants to lend money and somebody else wants to borrow it, the interest rate is the price for that transaction, which should be determined by the amount of money that's available to lend versus the amount of demand that there is to borrow money and the creditworthiness of the borrower. But it's not. That's a price that the Federal Reserve just says, hey, this should be 0%, and that's where it goes. And everything else has to adjust around that. It would be like if I told you the Federal Reserve is, what do you have in a beer?
No, it's only like 10 a.m. here.
Well, I might have. Well, that's all right. 10 a.m. It's fucking Sunday. The point is, it's like if the government was going to tell you that every can of Miller Lite had to cost $50 from now on, right? And that was it. We're going to fix the price. The government says, we know what's best. The price of Miller Lite cans has to go to $50. Think of all the things in the supply chain and with the amount of demand that beer has now. Think of all those things and how they would change. The cost of ingredients would go up, the demand would drop. So that's what the Federal Reserve is doing when they fix interest rates. They're price fixing the cost of borrowing money. And the economy kind of changes around that. And so MMT and new Keynesian theory and really what we've been on here the last couple of decades is the idea that we can micromanage the economy and fuck with it and kind of get it to do exactly what we want to do without any consequences. And that, humans, it's a very ethnocentric way of looking at the world of monetary policy and the global economy, that we can manipulate it to do what we want it to, and that the free market is never going to come in and kind of usurp that and kind of throw it back in our face with some real consequences. People like me, people that are critical of MMT, we think that at some point there are going to be some major consequences to that. primarily a loss of confidence in the US dollar, which is the global reserve currency. So people of my ilk and the people that I learned from, guys like Peter Schiff, how he's always going around saying that, the crash is coming, and people give him shit and say, oh, he's a pessimist, he's Dr. Doom, he's this, he's that. But really all he's trying to get across is the point that he believes that the free market will eventually take monetary policy back and take the economy back, and that the humans that are trying to fuck with it and manipulate it through our monetary policy will eventually be proven wrong. And that's really, when it boils down to it, everything, the criticism of the Fed, the wanting to own gold, the wanting to own silver, the criticism of fiscal policy, the criticism of monetary policy, it's a question of whether or not the central banks of the world have figured out some magic theory that is going to allow them to print as much money as they want without any type of real tangible consequences, and that they will be able to hold up this confidence game where people continue to believe in fiat currency, which has nothing tangible backing it. Okay, it's not backed by gold, it's not backed by silver, it's just paper. That they can hold that confidence game up ad infinitum, and that the chickens proverbially are not going to come home to roost. So that's a basic layout of things. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Right. Like Jim Rickards, you said the same word. He said to me that the dollar is actually just backed by confidence or psychology. And you could also argue men with guns. But so things I wonder about is like, okay,
if you were to offer to give me $100 today, or you're going to offer to give me $100 in gold, I would take $100 in gold.
I'd have to be really drunk to give you $100 of my gold.
Well, I'm just hypothetically though.
I know. I'm just
and we can do that. We can go out and get drunk and see if you do want to fork some money over to me, which would be great. But the point is, because as soon as I get gold, I have something that I know is going to preserve the amount of purchasing power that $100 would have today, versus the dollar that is immediately going to start to depreciate because of inflation, right? So a dollar today is going to buy you 2% less a year from now worth of goods or services than it's going to buy you today, which is why people are discouraged from saving money, because inflation sucks away the purchasing power of their money. And we can get into that if you want to.
Is that because right now they say the rate of inflation is at 2%? So when you
that's what the Fed's target is.
Okay.
They're targeting 2% inflation. The Fed doesn't really know. I mean, they have a basket of goods that they look at, but it doesn't really reflect real inflation, especially when you look. I was talking on my podcast the other day about the alternative art world. The super rich are out there trading fucking Da Vinci paintings that they bought last year for $100 million, and they're selling them this year for $150 million. And that's going on. And meanwhile, people are saying, where's the inflation? We don't see the inflation. But all inflation is a tax on the money that you've already earned. It's a way to
explain what that means. Like, it's a pretty interesting way of defining it. What does it mean that it's a tax on the money you've already earned?
So if you gave me $100 in cash today, right, the purchasing power of that $100 1 year from now would be 2% less than it is today, because of the rate of inflation, which is essentially the rate of, you think of inflation as the, prices rising 2% every year,
mm-hmm.
right? So if I have the same $100 and prices go up 2% every year, I'll be able to buy less a year from now than I can buy right now. Does that make sense?
Right. What concerns me?
If the price of fucking toothpaste goes up, and I want to spend $5 on toothpaste, and I can buy 12 ounces of toothpaste now, a year from now, $5 may only buy me 11 ounces of toothpaste instead of 12. Or It might buy me 12 ounces of toothpaste, but it might cost me $6 for the bottle instead of $5. Either way, you're getting less as time progresses.
Right. Interesting. So one of the things that concerns me a lot is the people that make 30 to 60 grand a year on salary, and it's pretty much the same every single year. If we get really significant inflation, and all of a sudden the middle class can't live off that salary level that's kind of more or less the same every year, that really concerns me. Another thing that I wonder is, do you think people are brainwashed to never even lose real genuine confidence in the dollar in America? I wonder about that. Like, if people are so brainwashed.
I don't think they're brainwashed. I think there's just not enough people out there explaining how the system works, which is one of the things that motivated me to want to look. I started a podcast because the guys that I liked listening to, Bill Fleckenstein, Peter Schiff, Ron Paul, these guys weren't getting the mainstream media attention that I thought that they deserved. Like, Peter Schiff is my favorite economist, right? I love listening to the guy. I think he's spot on. I think he's exceptionally intelligent. I see things the way that he sees things. But he was kind of phased out off of CM, despite being the one fucking guy that was out there that called the housing crisis. They just phased him out off of CNBC. They phased him out off of Fox Business News because what they want for ratings is they want euphoria, and they want people to buy into the system the way that it is. And they don't want people raising big questions. They don't want people going out and raising big systemic style questions, especially when they're fucking right, like in the case that he is. So
Yeah.
They kind of phased him out off the mainstream media. And I got annoyed with it. And I said, this is the type of person that we need to be hearing from now. So, look, it's 2018. I've got the tools to be a content creator myself. It's not something that I ever thought that I would want to do. But I said, fuck it. Like, I'll do a podcast and I'll interview, and we'll see if anybody gives a shit. And lo and behold, people are fucking sucking it up. Why? Because we're raising very good points, and we're doing it in a way that explains things to people where they can understand, what the moral hazard is of the path that we're going down now is. So it's not that people are brainwashed. It's just that nobody has taken the time to explain to them exactly how this works. I mean, my parents are great examples, right? They're wonderful people. They, and they raised me in a household with these very basic financial tenets, like save your money, underconsume. We had I had a modest upbringing. My parents were very good with money. They practiced what they preached, but even I remember the first couple of times that we started to talk about stuff like that, even they didn't really understand the basics of like, oh, all right, like why is that way? Everybody, like, inflation's a great example. People always just say, well, prices go up, Jake,
Right.
Like everybody says, prices
Right.
go up every year. You got to account for inflation. Nobody stops and asks why. Why does that happen? Why was a cup of coffee 15 cents for your grandfather and it's fucking $7.99 right now at the Starbucks by myself? You know what I mean? Nobody asks that. Nobody asks, why is that? Why does a cup of coffee cost $8 now when it used to cost $15? Explain how that works. Why do prices rise? Always. It's a good question. And if somebody could offer a good answer to that and explain why that's necessary, because it's not just asset prices that rise, it's your cost of living that rises too. And the point you just made is a wonderful one, which is if you work at a job for 5 years and you're only getting, your cost of living raises are 1% every year, and the real rate of inflation is 2 or 3% a year, you're actually not getting a raise every year. You're not even keeping up with inflation. So it's things like that people don't even understand. And then people wake up one day and they wonder why the inequality gap is so fucking wide, and it has a lot to do with our monetary theory. So people aren't brainwashed. If people got it and they could take the time to just understand some of the basics, I think that it would get a lot more traction and maybe we could make some real changes.
You're right about that. That's definitely a lot more empowering and optimistic view for me personally too, because sometimes it gets me a little discouraged. But you're right. It's not that people are brainwashed, it's that they don't know. And once people hear it, then they're like, holy cow. So you're definitely right about that. And I think that that's a lot. It gives a little bit more hope for the future too.
It's nobody's fault, right? Like these people, they're good people, like they're focused on whatever their job is. Like dude comes out and checks on my fucking air conditioner. Like that dude knows how my air conditioner works. I have no fucking clue how my air conditioner works. he's the fucking guy that I want there. If I need to learn how air conditioners work, that'll be the guy to explain it to me. But I don't expect everybody in the world to, have this huge interest in monetary policy, because for the most part, it's stuffy and it's fucking boring, So they're out there doing the right thing and working jobs and helping their fellow citizens and contributing to the productivity of the country. They just, they never took the time or never had the interest to examine how monetary policy works.
One of the other questions you said, why is the cost of things rising? That's a good question. One of the other questions that I think is a good question that takes you down the rabbit hole to the same way that I've noticed that people are right on the nose of, especially people in our generation that really are making $25,000 a year and they're in their 20s and their 30s and they're they don't have $1 left after every month. They ask, why is it so expensive to be alive? And especially living on a major coast in America, whether it's west or east, even just rent, rent is so expensive. And so I think that's another great example. Do you believe, obviously the population has a play in rent, but if all the houses are more expensive to buy, then the mortgages are going to be more expensive, which means the rent has to be more expensive for the landlord to make any profit on their unit anyways.
Sure.
So it pulls everything up. So do you think that why is it so expensive to live at the Cornerstone is because of this monetary policy?
I think that's part of it. Yeah, definitely. Because when you, right now with the CARES Act, what we're seeing is the Fed is printing about $50,000 per U.S. citizen in money out of thin air. Okay. So you all right?
I'm looking, I screenshotted that tweet. Could you, I wanted to talk to you about that tweet.
Oh, cool.
That was such a good tweet.
Let's do that now. So the Fed has printed, I don't know, I did it on the back of a cocktail napkin after 3 shots of whiskey a couple weeks ago. But the point is I did some math somewhere, and the Fed has essentially printed $7 trillion or something like that over the last 3-4 months. And what that amounts to is about $50,000 per U.S. citizen. So we have 340 million something citizens in the U.S. And at some point I did some math. Let's say maybe it's $30,000 or $40,000 a person, whatever, because I'm sure my math is wrong. The point is that 95% of that money, so everybody in the nation bears the inflationary cost of that money that's printed out of nowhere. Right. What that means is that the government doesn't create new purchasing power when it prints that money. All it's doing is slicing up the pizza of the nation's purchasing power into smaller slices, and it's distributing it in different ways, right? So you and I, we bear the cost of that inflation, of that new money being printed, which will eventually find its way into different asset markets, the housing market, the cost of bread, the cost of fucking lacrosse sticks, everything. It'll eventually meander its way out there, and it will drive up prices. You will bear the cost of that. I will bear the cost of that. Your listeners will bear the cost of that, to the tune of however much has been printed, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 per person. In exchange for that, what are we given by the government? Well, we're given $1,200 per person, right? The government has essentially thrown us a breadcrumb and said, hey, we're going to run some money off the printer here. Don't fucking pay attention to how much it is. We're going to throw you $1,200. Shut the fuck up after we do that, okay? Here's your $1,200. Go take a walk. Go buy a couple extra groceries this week, whatever you want to do. And don't worry about the other $28,000, $38,000, $48,000 of that slice of yours that we've printed. Don't worry about that. Well, why don't you want to worry about that? Because that's the money that goes to corporations. That's the money that goes to the junk bond market. Okay, the Fed is buying junk bonds. That's a whole other story that we could get into. They're essentially manipulating bond prices and saving companies that don't deserve to be saved, companies that need to fail. It's a necessity for these companies to fail because they're so poorly managed and poorly run. But essentially, that money is going to corporations. That money is going to these PPP loans, to hedge funds that are taking them. Some companies do need them. My local bar right down the street, they take a couple of PPP loans. They needed them. All right. That place was fucking shut down for 2-3 months. I know the owner personally. They didn't do well. They needed those loans.
Right.
Okay, different story. But a lot of that money, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, is going to people that don't need it. People are going to retire off that money. People are going to be buying yachts, cars with that money. The government, if anybody thinks that the government can keep track of the waste, fraud, and abuse that's happening with this trillions of dollars that's being distributed, trillions of dollars being printed and just being handed out. I went through the loan application the other day. I wanted to see what the loan application looked like. There's fucking nothing to it. You submit your Schedule C, or you submit your company's revenue for the year. You fill out a couple of things. You check a couple of boxes. Bing, bang, boom. You're done. Money's in your bank account, right? And so when you look at the list of all the corporations that have taken all this money, it is astounding. It's astounding. So that's where the money is going. All right. It's going to the people that don't need it. All right. The Fed's buying bonds in Berkshire Hathaway, in Apple, companies with tens of billions of dollars in the bank. Is that fucking necessary? Meanwhile, if you're a U.S. citizen and you've made over $100,000 a year because you've taken the time to work hard, maybe work 2 jobs, you're not even entitled to your $1,200. They say, oh, you don't need it. By the way, they're too busy handing out the other 90% of that money to corporations and to special interests that definitely don't fucking need it. It's like Ron Paul said in 2008 when they did TARP. Why don't you just chop up the money and give $15,000 per U.S. citizen? I mean, that's really where I learned to think like this. Why don't you do that? Because that's free market, a little bit more of a free market thought instead of crony capitalism, which is what we're doing now. So when that money goes to the rich who don't need it, when 90% of your fucking $50,000 goes to the rich, goes to the corporations, goes to people that already have shitloads of money, that does 2 things. One is it widens the inequality gap. And the second thing, what we're talking about, is it helps bid up assets, things like homes, things like financial assets. That's why you see stocks continuing to go up. Alternative assets. I was talking on my podcast the other day about the art market, the rare Scotch market. Some fucking old fuck who died, they auctioned off his Scotch collection for like $60 million a couple of weeks ago. All right. So that's where the money is going. Meanwhile, you can take your $1,200 breadcrumb and you can fuck off with it because you don't really know exactly what's going on and where all this money is coming from and how you're bearing that inflationary cost of all the money that's being printed. So it's really quite a gnarly, fucking uncool thing that's happening. And the effects are the cost of living rises for me and for you and for my listeners and your listeners who are regular people. All right, like you're saying, some guy just wants to go out and pay the fucking rent, right? You can't. The rent is too damn high, all right? Like, that is because there is a bid, meaning there is demand to purchase things like real estate in those areas. And you wonder, where does that bid come from? If all hell's breaking loose and we have 30% unemployment, whatever, and the economy should really be tanking, why is there still a bid there? The bid is there because the Fed is in there supporting the real estate market. The Fed's in there supporting the fucking corporate bond market. So it's very nefarious and it distorts markets, and the little guy almost always loses, which is why, Bill Fleckenstein was on my podcast a couple months ago and he said, Paul Krugman is I forget what he called him. Paul Krugman is I don't know, he called him not nefarious, but he said he's a grotesque individual or something because he's out there advocating for closing the wealth gap, closing the inequality gap, but he's advocating for these Fed policies where all they're doing is shoehorning the inequality gap open wider. And so people just don't really understand this. And then cost of living becomes, starts to take a toll on people. And then what happens is you can afford less, and then your quality of life, your standard of living goes lower. Unless you're, unless you're Apple, right? And you've got $250 billion in the bank already. Now you have $250 billion and you have the Fed backstopping your bonds too. Like they fucking need that, right? Meanwhile, there's people that can't afford to pay their rent.
Yeah, that's one of the worst parts is monetizing the corporate debt and the corporate bonds. I could have taken probably about $200,000 for my main business and I was listening to Peter, and I decided not to do it as well. And like, I could have used it. Like, I didn't need, like, I've taken my business taken a big hit, but like, I didn't need it. And knowing what I know, and, you know, everything that you teach, I didn't want to leave the principles that I think are so important. And so I elected not to do that. But then I saw Jeannie Buss and the Lakers took, like, dude, her dad is so, I mean, he's dead now, but he is so fucking rich. He's the owner of the Lakers, the Buss family. So rich. And she took like $10 million or something like that.
I could have gotten $20,833 because of my you know, I file a Schedule C, whatever, because I do you know, like a self-run business, whatever. So I could have gotten $20,833.
Yeah.
You think I don't want $20,833?
I know.
Of course I want $20,833. Did I take it? The answer is fuck no, I didn't take it. You know, like, why? Because otherwise, you know, I try to be a person of integrity. It would be fucked up if I sat on here and I was criticizing everybody for doing it, and then I did it myself.
That would be so funny.
Well, but dude, it's so, you know, one of the things that I do for a living is I do research on companies that I think are frauds, right? And it's something I work on with a buddy of mine, and we see day after day, week after week, how easy it is to perpetrate enormous frauds on the capital markets.
Yeah.
If you know how to do it, it's really easy. There's nothing to it. The risk reward of getting caught and the potential fines that you'll pay versus the amount of money you could make doing it is extraordinarily enticing. And we talk about it all the time. And we just say, like, dude, like, it's no wonder so many people do this, because it's so fucking easy.
Yeah.
You know, and these PPP loans are the same exact thing. You have all these hedge fund managers, all right, and corporations that manage money for a living, and I'm not going to go into names, but a lot of them took PPP money. Now, why is that fucked up? Well, it's fucked up because if you're an asset manager, if your job, and listen, I'm a free market capitalist. I like hedge funds, okay? I like money managers. I like people that do everything, all right? I'm not some fucking, you know, anti-billionaire type guy. I think if you can make yourself a shitload of money and you can do it legally by providing a product or a service that is benefiting people, then you're entitled to your wealth and you deserve it, okay?
Agreed.
Like, I'm a capitalist, brother. But
Agreed.
Here's the deal. If you run a hedge fund, I'm going to explain this for people that don't know how hedge funds work. Essentially, your job, what a hedge fund is a lot of people that are rich give you money, okay? You take everybody's money, $2 million here, $5 million here, $7 million here, $10 million here. And all a hedge fund is people are investing in your ability to invest their money. That's essentially it, right?
Okay.
So you take this huge clump of money that your clients, or in the business called limited partners. So if you ever hear LPs, that's what people are talking about. You take all your LPs money and you fucking mash it into a big pile. And then you got whatever, $100 million, right? You put that $100 million into an account, and then it's me here behind 3 fucking computer screens. And all I'm doing is I'm picking and choosing investments that I think are going to be the best, that is going to collectively grow that $100 million to 110, to 120, to 150, to 200. And then what happens is the amount that goes up is divided up amongst all the LPs. So if I grow the 100 million to 120 and you invested 10,000, you'll now have 12,000, right?
Got it.
Minus the annual fee, right? So you pay a fee to most hedge funds charge 2 and 20, which is 2% every year of your money goes to them, and 20% of your profits.
Oh shit, 20%. Wow, that's
right. If you
nice.
make $2,000 for somebody, you're entitled to $400 of that.
Wow.
Right. And everybody should be happy. The manager's happy because he's doing good performance. The LP should be happy because they still have $11,600 when they started with $10,000.
Right.
And whatever. And that just gets divided up amongst all the LPs, right? So the hedge fund business is essentially all done electronically. It doesn't require, it's not a fucking taco stand, okay? Where like, you got to have the door open every day and people are coming in and coming out. And when you shut down, that's it. No more tacos. It's not like that. The markets stayed open, right?
Right.
The markets didn't close during the pandemic. And really everything that can be done at a hedge fund, and I know this because I've worked alongside hedge funds. I know, pretty much how they work. Everything can be done from behind a computer. The administrative stuff, the tax documents that go out every year, the actual investing of money, the communicating with shareholders and your LPs.
Not to mention on top of that too, the other thing is also your ideal customer was not nearly, if any, affected by it. Whereas like if you have a lower market customer and they lost their money, you've lost customers that would pay you. Whereas these people are so rich that a lot more of them are probably willing to hang in there. You're not losing all your customers instantly like that happened to a lot of people.
Well, get this. It's even better than that, dude. It's even better than that. So lest we forget that you can, there's some hedge funds that manage $1 billion, $2 billion a year that really they have 25 or 30 employees. Okay.
Right. Wow.
If you manage $1 billion a year and you have 30 or 40 or 50 employees, you have to think about, all right, well, what's 2% of the $1 billion that they manage? And what are they scraping off the top in fees every year? It's a considerable amount of money that these funds make, right? So then you start thinking, where's the interruption due to the pandemic lockdown? Well, there really isn't one. The money stays in those accounts and the fees continue to come off that money exactly the same way they would. Doesn't matter whether the McDonald's down the street is open or closed. Doesn't matter whether you're quarantined at your home or not. The thing that changed was the market dipped at one point, right?
Right.
Which means maybe two things. One is if you were not a good investment manager, your clients may have lost money when the market went down. But that's the breaks of the business. You're in the job of being prepared for those situations. Your job as an asset manager is to get in front of those moves. If you lose money for your clients and then your clients pull their money out of your hedge fund, that doesn't have anything to do with COVID. It has everything to do with the fact that you're a dumbass that didn't know how to get ahead of what was going to happen in the market. So there were people out there in January and February saying the market's going to tank because of coronavirus. The market's going to tank because of coronavirus. The market's going to tank because of coronavirus. I know because I was one of them, right? Yeah. And I'm the fucking world's biggest goober. So if I can see it coming, how come people that are managing $1 billion or $2 billion or $10 billion couldn't? The point is that if you can't manage the money effectively enough, that money would be coming out of your fund. Clients would be redeeming that money regardless of whether there's a pandemic or not. So to sign up for a loan and say that you're being affected by the pandemic in the same way that like a restaurant manager was being affected by the pandemic, when essentially their business shut down, their revenue went to zero for those months, and a hedge fund's revenue continued as it normally would. So for those type of businesses to take that money, to take those loans is totally disingenuous, and it is completely fucked up. And it's a perfect example of how this money has been misallocated. And again, how the people that listen to your show, my show, etc., wind up bearing the brunt of this inflationary cost that goes out and benefits all these other people.
Yeah, well said, man. Well said. And really eye-opening, this is why, this stuff is, like you said, people don't know it. And that was really why I wanted to make this channel and start doing all these interviews. Let me ask you, at the core, the thing that scares me probably out of it is because people aren't educated on really why this is all happening. People know this type of stuff and it pisses them off. So they want to go, blow up a building and light shit on fire and yell and whatever they do. They're pissed off about it, right?
Sure.
And then because we don't know the true source, everybody thinks that they call it capitalism. And they say, this is what capitalism, this sucks. And then people that are really poor, whether you're really poor and you're white, you're really poor and you're African-American, you're really poor and you're Hispanic, then you start to think that, the cause is capitalism. If you're middle class and you're not getting ahead, you think the cause is capitalism. And then it's the classic problem, reaction, solution. We created a problem. Everybody's pissed off. Now here's the solution: socialism. So
That's
let's
that's
talk
the
about
David
that.
Icke expression, isn't it?
Yeah, I
The
interviewed
conspiracy
David Icke,
theorist.
but they pulled my interview. But I interviewed him
Yeah,
before he
well,
got
fuck
pulled
them.
off
You
YouTube.
know, I'm getting tired of this shit with all the censorship. I really am. You know, that's the thanks you get. If you want to go out and you want to light buildings on fire, you're praised as some kind of fucking, you know, incredible revolutionary that's making some profound point. But if you come on a podcast and you explain yourself succinctly and you explain in complex terms why you have a problem with the system and what your beef is and why it's legitimate, they take your shit off the fucking social media platforms.
You know what's funny, bro, is you're saying that. And it's almost, you know, everyone talks about false flag operations. It's almost like the greatest false flag operation is collapsing the economy and then making the solution socialism. That's almost
Well,
like the
it's
greatest.
really dangerous. So, first off, to your point, that is exactly what's happening. People think capitalism is the problem because people don't understand that what's going on isn't capitalism. It's not free market capitalism for a central bank to print 6 trillion, 7 trillion, and then hand it out, you know, discretionarily. That's crony capitalism. That's even closer to socialism, actually. Exactly. Then, so the blame kind of, and this is so unfortunate, and Peter Schiff talks about this all the time, that the blame is going to wind up going to capitalism, and people are going to think that socialism is the solution. Socialism is significantly worse. First off, the people that are advocating for Marxism, socialism, etc., they don't understand the history of socialism. They don't understand the history of Marxism. They don't understand the tens of millions of people that have died as a result of these types of ideologies. And they don't really understand what the consequences would be economically in terms of their quality of living. You know, look, 20 years ago, Venezuela was hailed as a socialist paradise. They're one of the richest countries in the world, you know, et cetera. Now it's a fucking demilitarized zone where you got to stand in line to get bread. And if you think that can't happen in other places where you institute socialism, you're sorely mistaken. So we have to look at history. We have to learn from the history of Marxism, the history of socialism, and despite the fact that it sounds utopian, it sounds wonderful, in practice, it does not work. And it is a very slippery slope to go down. People also don't understand, Brother Jake, that all of the things that we have in our life today that we love, and all of the liberties that we enjoy, and all of the products and services that make up, you know, our awesome day that we have every single day, right? I get up, I go downstairs, I make a thing of Wawa coffee that I purchased from Wawa. I come up here, I fire up my Dell computer with my Shure microphone, and on my iPhone, I'm chatting with you. I'm doing a podcast. I'm doing work for my buddy, whatever. All of the things that need to be done on a daily basis that we're enjoying without really thinking about, well, where do they come from? Why do we have these things? Are all the result of a capitalist system. You know, all of these companies that make all these badass products and services are all, that's why I put out this joke, you know, on my Twitter a couple months ago saying, all right, people are on their iPhones drinking their Starbucks complaining that capitalism sucks. It's like, you don't have those things if capitalism, so people have no clue how profoundly things would change if you put the state in charge of the products or services instead of allowing companies to compete to offer the consumer the best value, which really is, you know, capitalism is what empowers the consumer. You vote with your money essentially when you go out and you spend it. But one of the examples I came up with the other day, I was talking about this with somebody, was cell phone service. I was just outside, I was using my cell phone, and I was just thinking like, wow, all right. So if my cell phone service sucks, right? I'm with AT&T now. If AT&T sucks, I can go and I can switch to T-Mobile, or I can switch to Verizon, or I can switch to, you know, whatever, Metro PCS, until I find somebody that's providing the service in my area that I deem good enough to use, right? So if you live in one of those areas that's in between towers, or, you know, you live off the beaten path a little bit, maybe, and I remember years back, you know, I had to switch to Sprint for one neighborhood that I lived in because Sprint was the only place that got coverage inside of my house. Otherwise, I couldn't use my phone inside of my house. So I had the choice as a consumer to go and do that. I went with the product or the service that worked the best for my particular needs at that point. They offered something. It gave me the coverage I wanted. It was affordable enough, whatever. So I said, I'm out of fucking T-Mobile and I'm going to Sprint, right? That choice is only there for the consumer because cell phone service is, and you can argue it's a small market. It's like the airlines, right? There's only 6 of them or 5 of them, and they kind of do have a semi-monopoly because they all, raise and lower prices at the same time. Right. But they still want to compete for your business, right? If you had the government running, just say, cell phone service, and the United States was in charge of a nationwide 5G network. And that was how, they said that they were going to do the next iteration of cell phone service. We're going to take out Verizon, we're going to take out AT&T, and we're going to have the United States Cellular Phone Network Department, right? Just like the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of the VA or the motor vehicles or whatever. Think about all those services that the government has provided and the way that they do them. They're horribly inefficient. They work terribly. It would be like if you had the people working at the DMV also as the people that were in charge of providing you with cell phone service. How do you think the service would be? Do you think anybody would give a shit if you say, "Oh, I want to switch"?
And you'd have to wait in line for so long.
Yeah, and you can't switch now. So there's no incentive for them to make the product or the service better or to offer it at a lower price. So anytime you socialize an industry like that and you give government control of it, the quality goes way down, the price likely comes up, and the quality of living for the consumer gets much worse. So that would happen, but not just cell phone service. You would start to see it across all different types of industries. And that's very dangerous. And it will bring down the quality of life for U.S. consumers, but we don't understand that. You got a bunch of fucking 20-year-olds out there now, okay, that have their choice between their Dunkin' Donuts or their Starbucks, or, they have their choice between their cell phone carriers or whether they want, an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy or whatever. And they just think that's the norm because they don't know anything else. And they think they think there's some great socialist utopia out there where they get all the benefits of capitalism, plus everybody fucking holds hands and sings Kumbaya every day and, uses the right gender pronouns and whatever. I'm for all of it. I want everybody to be happy. But socialism is not the way to do it. So liberty, limited government, and the free market is really the best way to get all of these things that people want.
Yeah, the other thing that would be scary about them having the government controlling cell service is the surveillance that would happen if there was one monopoly on it. That would be nuts. I wouldn't have a cell phone anymore. I would just get rid of my cell phone. So that's a really good way to define it, especially for our generation that doesn't understand it in the most simplistic way. Is you're saying socializing an industry just basically in the simplest ways. Tell me if I'm correct. It basically just means that the government is going to take control of that industry and provide the
yeah. You don't get a choice between whether or not you want to drive a Ford or a Chevy or a Volkswagen or a BMW or an Audi or a Daimler or an Acura or a Honda or a Toyota. You drive a U.S. Motors shitbox, whatever their model car is called. You know what I mean? And that's it. Every person will be distributed one fucking sedan and have a nice day. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, tough shit.
So do you think that we're going there? Like, it just kind of concerns me seeing the riots and the number of people at the core that, just truly hate. They've put all the blame on capitalism, and it does make me concerned that it's going to get, that it's just going to get really bad, and nobody really wants to even think about it because it's so, everyone just wants to live their life and do their thing. And it really does concern me that we're going to get a total socialist system in your and my lifetime. Do you think that that's where we're going?
I think there is a main vein of this country that is tapping into, first off, I think the key problem is the ignorance of not understanding what these people are advocating for. So if you're a Marxist movement, no matter what your cause is, or you're a socialist movement, do you really understand what it is you're advocating for? Do you understand how an economy works, how it operates, how we achieve the quality of life that we have now, even with whatever gripes you want to bring to the table now? Do you understand how we got to where we are now and what the consequences are of moving from capitalism to socialism? And do you understand historically what has happened when people have tried to employ socialism?
Let's pretend I'm a socialist and I say back to you, no, it's helped everything. Tell me what you mean, right? Because I want to stay on this conversation because I think you do such a great job explaining it.
It just hasn't, though.
Okay.
I mean,
why?
If you look, well, because like take, for example, if you wanted to switch from capitalism to socialism, one of the main things that would need to happen would be that the state would need to usurp power. In other words, right? So the state would have to come in and shut down privately owned businesses and would literally have to force itself into being the only choice, right? That's not just something where like you put out a press release and you say, okay, you got to close all restaurants aside from, these 3 fast food restaurants that the government is going to take a stake in, and these 3 casual dining chains that the government's going to take a stake in. Everybody else has to close. And by the way, turning your guns too. That's the other thing. Like, do you think that would go over well? No, of course not. So anytime there's been a switch to socialism, or even in the past where socialist leaders have had a changing of the guard and there's been a usurping of power from the people to the government, that comes at a very steep cost. I mean, people lose personal property, people die. There's been tens of millions of deaths throughout history. All you got to do is look at communist China, look at Mao, look at Stalin, look at, Lenin. There's always been, it's always ugly when you try to make that shift, when it boils down to it. So there's a good reason, but you also lose, you lose your individual property rights. You lose a lot of your individual liberties. You lose the quality of your life. You lose the ability to choose the products and services that you want in your life.
So what if I said back and I said, look, man, but you don't understand. I'm not talking about that kind of socialism. I'm talking about the kind of socialism where no one's left behind. And I'm not talking about the government.
I would say give me a historical example of where that's worked.
What most of those people then say is, well, look what's happening in Denmark and in Norway.
Denmark is a market economy. As a matter of fact, it was Denmark's prime minister or Denmark's president came out a couple of years ago and made a point to say Denmark is a market economy. Denmark is not a socialist economy.
A market economy meaning that...
I'm going to find the... hold on. I'm going to find...
Okay, cool. And if you want to, you said you might go grab a beer, you're welcome to do that. And I can always just clip a section out if you stand up and go grab it for a minute.
Don't go anywhere. Hold on.
Cool.
Danish Prime Minister in the United States. After seeing his country held up as an example in the U.S. presidential debate, Danish Prime Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen used an address at Harvard to explain the Nordic model to a U.S. audience suddenly very interested in Denmark. Speaking at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, Danish Prime Minister Lars Rasmussen told students that he had, quote, absolutely no wish to interfere in the presidential debate in the U.S., quote, but nonetheless attempted to set the record straight about his country. Quote, I know that some people in the U.S. associate the Nordic model with some sort of socialism. Therefore, I would like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy, Rasmussen said. The Nordic model is an expanded welfare state which provides a high level of security for its citizens, but is also a successful market economy with much freedom to pursue your dreams and live your life as you wish.
So then what they say is, yeah, well, that's the kind of socialism that I'm talking about. What I want is I want to get rid of all the
Well,
billionaires. I want all the millionaires to be
but,
taxed, and I want
but
to
there's
make
still, yeah,
$4,000 a month and get my shit paid for. And I want these guys that are, I want to get rid. Like that's what the argument is, right? From people in our generation.
so there's millionaires and billionaires in Denmark. Okay. And that's a different argument. That's the argument of, okay, I want to raise taxes because I want the government to provide healthcare instead of having healthcare privatized. They want to socialize an industry instead of socializing the entire economy, right? And then that goes to an argument of whether or not the government can provide you healthcare cheaper and more efficiently and with better options and with a better choice for the consumer than the private healthcare industry, which becomes a free market versus socialism style argument in the sense that the industry would essentially be socialized, right? So the question is, how much do your premiums go up and what does your healthcare look like? So for example,
They would say, hey, idiot, my premium's not going up. It's going down because the government's going to provide it for me. That's what they would say, right? Like that would be their argument back. I know this because ironically, one of my buddies I hadn't seen in a few years, he's a little younger. He's probably like 23, kind of hippie guy, broke. And he made the argument, or he said the statement, he said, well, what about moving to Canada? Because I'm getting out of San Diego and I'm going and getting
good example. I'm glad you brought that up.
I'm getting like 30 acres in Spokane, well underground. I'm going to be totally sustainable. It's my apocalypse property for what's to come. So he goes, why not Canada? Healthcare is free there. And I said, they're going to, I said tax. And he said, but the healthcare is free. So what about that?
Well, it's not free. The healthcare is paid for with much higher taxes in Canada. So the taxes are through the roof, right? There's two ways to pay for socializing healthcare. One is you tax everybody and the money comes from there. And the other way, which we would probably look at in the United States now, would be to print the money and just monetize the cost of healthcare, which would result in huge inflationary consequences, right?
Okay.
So one way or another, if you're a doctor, you have to get paid. You're either getting paid as, a private practice that accepts private insurance that gets reimbursed from the insurance, or you're getting paid as a socialist practice that's getting reimbursed by the government. And the question is, who is the better capital allocator? The money has to come from people one way or another. In Canada, they pay much higher taxes. And the quality of the service, and I happen to know this because the company that I worked for was right on the US-Ontario border, right on the Queenston-Lewiston Bridge. And so all of my friends were Canadian. I spent a lot of time in Canada. I mean, I lived on Lake Ontario, and I would talk to one of my closest friends, this girl that I knew named Christine. I remember her telling me one day, oh, I got to go to the physio because I hurt my leg or something or other. And I say, all right, well, we were comparing notes on how healthcare systems worked in the US. And I would say, oh, okay, like, well, this is how I would have to do it. And she'd say, oh, well, like you guys pay all this money for your healthcare, but you don't, we don't have to pay that. And I said, all right, well, what's the deal with your appointment? And she's like, oh, well, I got to wait like 8 weeks to get my appointment. And I'm like, all right, well, I could probably get an appointment in like a week or two.
And my leg's broken too, so I got to stay home for those 8 weeks.
Right. So the quality of the service differs, but ultimately it's paid for. It's not free. The idea that it's free is a misnomer. Because somebody has to pay to keep the fucking lights on at the doctor's office. Somebody has to pay the doctor to go in. Doctors aren't just going into the office and just fucking working because they feel like it. Because I'm doing it for Denmark. I'm just
and taking $400,000 in college loan debt.
I'm here because I love my country and I have no interest in getting a BMW like the rest of the doctors. Fuck no, they're in there because they want to make money too. Right. So the money is what incentivizes the doctors to go in and go to work. That money has to come from somewhere. In a socialized system, it has to come from somewhere. And in a privatized system,
it's going to come from the billionaires. So then that's like
the question is, who do you want to make the choice? Do you want the individual to be able to choose their insurance and then choose their doctor? Or do you want the state to be able to say, here's your doctor, here's your insurance, You can think that it's free, but it's being paid for one way or another. And then that turns into a taxation question. Who do we tax? Do we tax the billionaires more? Do we tax the millionaires more? Do we tax the lower class less? It becomes a question of that. So it's possible to run a model like the Nordic model, but they're not a socialist economy. They're a market economy.
Okay. So I never even heard, I just know obviously I agree with you on all these things. I'm just talking because I'm hoping that this will reach, some people that are on the fence about socialism. Sure. And I think it's an important conversation for our
I do too.
Generation. So then, yeah, that's interesting. I was listening to Dollar Vigilante the other day on YouTube, and he's from Canada.
By the way, let me just say something. I'm not some fucking like huge billionaire either. Like, I'm just a regular fucking schmuck. All right. I live in a condominium. All right. I live in a 1,200 square foot condominium, and I drive a car that has a dent in the bumper. Okay. So I'm not fucking George Soros here trying to defend capitalism because I've got all this money. I just want to fucking hoard, and I don't want anybody, I don't want anybody getting my money. It's not like that at all. Okay. Like, I just think ideologically, it makes a lot more sense. And when you remember that what's going on now is crony capitalism, probably closer to socialism, what's going on now, than actual free market capitalism, your listeners have to want to give free market capitalism a try before they just defect to saying, oh, okay, like, look, we need to just go with Karl Marx.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well said too. And I think that what you said makes a lot of sense. You said at the core, the question is the government going to provide it and then tell me what I can get, or do I get to pick for myself? And that's basically what socialism is then. Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you worried about AOC
not just healthcare,
president one
not
day?
just healthcare, right?
It's everything.
In a socialist economy, it's everything. So you have a choice right now as a consumer. You want to eat a fucking taco, you eat a taco. You want to drink a beer, you drink a beer. You want to drive a Honda, you drive a Honda. You want to watch a LG TV, you watch an LG TV. You want to buy an Xbox instead of a PS4, you buy an Xbox instead of a PS4. You want to buy a stainless steel refrigerator instead of a fucking white refrigerator, you do that. You want a front load washer instead of a top up and down washer, then you buy that. You have choices. Choices everywhere, okay? That's what capitalism is about. It's about choices. Being able to fulfill the needs of the consumers in the best and cheapest way possible. Right now, we're doing this on computers, right? This computer that I have here cost me about $1,300. It's probably got more fucking computing power in it than most supercomputers, 20 years ago. Why is that? Because the people that are in charge of making electronics want to make more money. And what do they do if they want to make more money? They got to provide a better product at a lower price. So if you look at things like computers, for example, or you look at like cell phones, you're getting way more bang for your buck in these types of products and services because the people that are making them are incentivized to keep the price low and continue to compete with each other and keep the quality higher. And that's why, products like these continue to evolve and they continue to get better. In a socialist economy, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's well said. That's at the core, the benefits to our freedoms in capitalism are that we are incentivized to make things better. Yeah.
You ever see a picture of fucking North Korea when they take those tours in North Korea and they're like, here's our computer lab, and it's a completely like set up, it looks like something out of a school play, and it's one guy and he's sitting there on like a fucking Commodore 64, just like, oh, we have the best technology here. It's
have you seen the movie, The Interview?
You're fucking 50 years behind the rest of the world. Like, that's what happens in a socialist economy. Yeah, a long time ago, but I was stoned and I don't remember.
Oh man, that thing's so funny. It reminds me of the example of, if you recall, when they're trying to say they have lots of fat kids and they say they have great stores and they prop up the fake store, and she's like, we have lots of fat kids and we have great stores, but then they find out all the groceries are made out of wood. When James Franco goes over there, it's all fake.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between communism and socialism then?
That's a really good question that I could probably take a stab at answering, but I might not be the
because
best
somebody
person.
Might be like this. They might say like this, like you sound like.
I think communism is a form of socialism, or it's the other way around. But generally, in the same sense, they they both kind of fall under the same umbrella, which is, equality amongst the laborers, giving the working class the power.
And government uses military force to further that.
Well, I can't remember if communism is a part of socialism. One of them falls under the other's umbrella. They're both generally fall under the same, they're both like post-Marxist thinking, right?
Do you worry about AOC or someone like that?
Yes, I do.
Becoming president one day when we're a little bit older?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
it frightens the shit out of me. Yeah. When I see people like Rashida Tlaib say, why doesn't the Fed just mint $1 trillion coin? It's like, yeah, why doesn't the Fed just mint $1 trillion coin? Like, the worst part is she thinks that that's a good idea. She thinks, I just came up with something. I just did something. She thinks I just produced an idea that's worth putting out there. When it's like, that is so mind-bogglingly stupid. But the problem is people don't understand why it's stupid.
Why is it stupid?
Well, it's stupid because the government can't create purchasing power. It can just create new money, which redistributes purchasing power wherever you move it. So all you're doing is taking this pool of purchasing power and adjusting it to wherever, all creating new money out of thin air does is just create pure inflation. That's it. And with pure inflation, prices rise and the purchasing power of the money that you already have goes down.
So where do we go from here? What's your kind of prediction of where we are right now in this very interesting 2020?
I'm also worried, by the way, too. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but please. I'm also worried, too. I just saw like another congresswoman, this woman, Ayanna Pressley, put out the other day, and I was just talking about this on my podcast yesterday. Cancel rent, cancel mortgages, cancel student debt. Yeah. That was her tweet. She said those 3 things.
Wow.
That goes along the same lines of free healthcare. It's like, okay, is it free? Well, no, it's not really free. Somebody's still got to pay the doctor. Okay, well, when you say cancel rent and cancel mortgages and cancel student loans, can that be done without consequence? That's the question that needs to be asked. You can't just fucking wipe the things off the books and expect that there's not going to be any consequence. What if you're a landlord that invested $20 million in an apartment building and you're hoping to generate $2 million a year for the next 10 years to pay off your investment and then have that be your source of cash flow? What happens to you if that's canceled? One of 2 things happens. By canceling rent, you're either asking people to default on rent, which fucks the landlord, or you're going to monetize it by printing more money, which causes inflation to run up, which means that the $2 million the guy makes next year is going to be worth even less than the $2 million he makes this year. So there's no real good solution. So when you say cancel mortgages, I mean, look, I got a mortgage. Jake, you think I feel like paying my fucking mortgage? If somebody came up to me, they're like, hey, man, just take the house scot-free. You think I wouldn't be like, fuck yeah? Think I don't want to be like, fuck yeah, cancel mortgages? Fuck yeah, cancel debt? Fuck yeah, let's help. But no, I can't get behind it because it's a logical fallacy, right? So as much as I want to advocate for that, and even I could probably go so far as to becoming like some well-informed activist because like I know a little bit about this shit, to go out there and say like, yeah, we can do it. The inflation's not showing up. We can just print it. We're on MMT now. It's a fiat world. Like I could probably do that and probably in my lifetime might not suffer the huge consequences of it. I might be able to help get universal basic income out there and all this other shit. But at the end of the day, I don't believe in it. I believe it's a logical fallacy. I believe at some point it turns into catastrophic consequences. And I was thinking about this today when I was running. It's funny that we're talking about this because I was thinking like, well, why is it that I'm so fucking concerned with this stuff? Like, really? Like, what makes me want to get up here and shriek into this microphone for an hour to you about this stuff? Like, why is that? And it just boils down to I really want what's best for the country. And in essence, I want what's best for the world. And to me, I don't know, free market capitalism really makes the most sense to me. It gives people the most opportunity, when it's not crony capitalism and the Fed doesn't have its boot on the neck of the, lower class and the people that are in the socioeconomic cellar. But I think it affords the most opportunity. It bestows upon the consumer the most power possible. And I don't know. The idea of in our country life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and our Constitution, and the way that our country is run, and the way that our founding fathers wanted the country to be run, it makes sense to me. I mean, it was well thought out. There's a reason that they didn't go with the first Continental Congress or whatever the fuck it was, because when they rewrote the Constitution, they did it this way for a reason, and it just, I don't know, it seems to just make the most sense to me. And I want what's best for everybody. I want equality. I want diversity. I want equality of opportunity for everybody. And I think this is the way to get there. And so, that's kind of why I stand for these things and why I advocate for these things. And I feel also too that if people were informed and people understood how the system worked a little bit better, that it would be easier for them to make the decision that, free market capitalism is the way to go too, and limited government's the way to go too. And, but I don't expect everybody to agree with me, and I respect people that have different opinions and want different things. I just think ultimately, as far as ideologies go, and the history of ideologies and what our best choices going forward, this makes the most sense to me.
Yeah, I'd love to see you more on YouTube, especially for the size of your audience, just making normal videos, talking point like I do on my personal development channel. I think that it would be good to have someone like you crushing YouTube. I can help you. I know how the algorithm works. I just love to see you. You're such I think a very important teacher for our generation too, because a lot of 20s, they don't want to listen to a 65-year-old that even if they're espousing the same thing you're doing, it's just like, oh, it's some rich guy.
Right.
So it's nice to have you. I'd love to, if you're open to it, I'd love to extend the invitation to help you, get your YouTube channel more up in the 100,000 plus and be an important voice for the capitalism, socialism in our generation, because, there's a lot of people in our generation that are consuming financial content on YouTube. So I want to say that first.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that offer very much. I haven't spent a lot of time trying to get, I think I have like 13,000.
I could tell you've spent no time on it, but there's a way to do it that
like I can tell it looks like dog shit. All
well,
right?
It's like probably the same thing you think when you look, like I don't use Twitter. I just only reason I started using Twitter was once I started doing these interviews and all my gold and silver, and I go follow certain people. So it's probably you look at my Twitter the same way I look at your YouTube, and I think you have an important, it's like a cosmic purpose that's really important for America and the freedoms of. My wife's pregnant. She's about to have the baby any day. I might get the call in an hour. We're literally within a couple days max of having our first girl. And it really fucking concerns the shit out of me. The world, I have 90% of my net worth in physical gold, physical silver, and mining stocks. I'm getting 50 acres, getting the hell out of here.
That's the way to do it.
I'm concerned about my daughter.
You're not the only one too, man. You see Joe Rogan's moving to Texas?
Yeah.
From Los Angeles. You know why? Because who the fuck wants to pay 90% in taxes to live in a state like California where the leadership has no control? How would you want to raise a daughter in a place where that there's a possibility of just riots and protests and things
concerns me even more.
Things getting out of hand, and your elected officials, they want to defund the police. Yeah. And most Americans are people just like you, dude. They got a wife that they love. They got, either they have kids already or they have a daughter on the way, like you said, and they want somewhere where they can raise their children, where there's law and order, where, they can love one another, where they can be charitable, where they choose to be charitable, where they can earn money for themselves. It's not going to fucking disintegrate the second after they take hold of it. Yeah. They just want those basics, right? And you look at the world today and what the hell's going on, dude? It's falling apart. It's falling apart. You have a bunch of fucking unemployed people with no money that instead of going out and wanting to get a job and wanting to be productive and get ahead and earn for themselves, they just choose to advocate for handouts. And personally, I don't blame some of them because they look at things. I don't blame
them at all.
They look at things like this CARES Act and what's happening, and they say, this is fucking unbelievable that these people are getting this money. and we're not, right? So I think they have a legitimate gripe there. It's just, what do you think the solution to that should be? They think it should be socialism and universal basic income,
Right.
and I think it should be a pure free market system where they can advance based on the amount of productivity that they generate.
Right. And that's why I'm saying at the core, it's almost like David Icke's problem reaction solution. The greatest version of problem reaction solution is the global economy and where they can take it by having people's concerns redirected. And that's why I'm saying I'd love to help you have, like I know how the YouTube algorithm works, and I think what you're doing is really important. And I'd love to, help you, especially to our generation, not preaching to the choir type of people, but reach the new people.
Well,
Because
don't
it's
you have like
important.
1 trillion YouTube subscribers or something ridiculous?
I have 7 trillion. I have the most in the world.
Well, here's how I think about things. And by the way, I looked at some of your videos the other day, and all the like manifestation stuff and shit. And here's what I'll tell you. You're right that I haven't spent a lot of time on my YouTube channel because there is a certain part of me that feels like a lot of this has to be organic. I don't really want to. I didn't really want to even do my podcast. This wasn't like a thing where I was like, oh, I want to get out there. I want to be the guy that advocates for this, this, and this. A lot of it came very naturally, right? Like it chose me instead of I chose it, right? It's just shit that I get fired up about. So I'll fire up the microphone and I'll yell about it, and then I'll go downstairs and I'll have a beer and I'll fucking play Xbox, right? Like just like a normal schmuck. So I'm not super in this mode where like I need to grow my channel or I need
But
to
it's not
grow
it's not growing your channel for the sake of growing your channel. It's understanding that you're an important instrument that is important for the social development of America,
brother,
for our generation.
I am what I am, all right? And there will be people that find me one way or another, and there will be people that don't find me. And either way, I'm okay with that. And there's people that hate what I say, and there's people that love what I say. And I don't know. I feel like to some degree when you're talking about things like this, because a lot of this stuff is it's very fucking emotional, and it's very closely knit, in the fiber of people's being. When you're talking about politics, you're talking about ideology, you're talking about the economy, you're talking about people's how they earn a living. You're talking about how they interact with their family, how they interact with their community. It's very personal stuff. And it's the type of thing where the more you force it on people, the less they want to fucking listen to it, And so that's why I was always been like, I was fascinated that my podcast picked up. I get like 150,000 listens a month to my podcast right now. And I never expected that ever. I mean, I thought maybe, I'd get 20 or 30 people an episode. I had no fucking idea. I had no clue 2 years ago that people would even do it. And I didn't go out there. I didn't advertise. I wasn't buying Facebook ads. I wasn't on other people's. I would go on interviews. People would say, how do people find you? I'd be like, listen, if they want to find me, they'll find me. I'm not going to be on here saying www.fuckinghandjob.com, whatever, like go check my shit out, because it's not important. It's like a relationship, man. You meet your wife, you fall in love. You don't force it. You don't grab her and say, you got to love me. You let things fucking develop. You let things manifest the way that they're supposed to. And some people will come to you. Others will go in different paths. And I'm fine with that. And A, that's actually my mindset. And B, it saves me a lot of time and energy too. Because I'm not like, I got to make the right fucking thumbnail for this thing. And does the thing fit? And I'm terrible with all that shit anyways. So I got a message just literally before I did this thing. It's like, dude, you haven't updated your website in a month. I'm like, yeah, well, it might be 2 months. So get used to it, because I got a lot of other shit to do.
Website's more pointless. And I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, also now that I've interviewed you and the fact that I think you're, especially the capitalism versus socialism for the younger generation, I think that at the same time, I understand what you're saying, and it's obviously your personality of like, but at the same time, I think you need to understand also that, you say you want what's best for people and that these concern you. And I think you're one of the few voices that can appeal to a younger generation that can illustrate these things, but it's also on top of it so well versed. And so I'd like to see I'm guilting you for the sake of my for my little girl's generation, that more people understand capitalism, socialism, these types of things. So let me ask you kind of in conclusion here, and I'd love to, I mean, I could talk to you for 10 hours. It's really fascinating. You're really fascinating. And I'm really glad we got to spend a lot of time on socialism and capitalism. And let me ask you, what's your prediction? What's the Ravens' prediction on? By the way, did you know that speaking of the Raven, Jim Rickards and Robert Kiyosaki are writing a book right now called The Ravens, and it's about predicting the future. And it's funny that you're so. Let me ask you, the Raven, what's your prediction on how this plays out through the rest of the year, next year, and kind of what you're seeing in the world right now, and what you're kind of anticipating?
Well, first off, I want to say thank you. What you said before is a very nice compliment, and I didn't want to come off like a prick and make it seem as though I didn't appreciate what you were saying, because it was a very kind thing to say, and I really do. I genuinely appreciate it. It means a lot to me. So I just didn't want to come off as flippant before.
No, I get it. It's just like, fuck, I let the universe figure it out, bro. And I'm like, dude, but still, come on. I get it.
Well, anyways, thank you for that. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. But, my prediction is I think things are going to get very interesting heading into the election. I think no matter what the results of the election are, there's going to be civil unrest.
Massive.
Yeah. And I'm not looking forward to it. I mean, one of the things that I talk about on my podcast once in a while is the Second Amendment. And people over the last 10 years have always laughed about the Second Amendment because they think it's for duck hunting, and here we are over the last 6 months, and we've started to understand a little bit better why we need a Second Amendment, right? The Second Amendment was there
to spray people that he doesn't like at hunting ranges. That's what Dick Cheney uses the Second Amendment for, to spray people with
Dick Cheney. And he didn't even fucking walk out into the woods. He had somebody drive him out into the woods on a Jeep, and then he fucking shot the guy he was with. Like, dude, you are fucking doing hunting wrong, okay? Like I've lived in fucking West New York on Lake Ontario. I watch these guys hunt. They get dressed in camouflage. They go sit in a fucking tree stand for 8 hours. It's a real thing. They hunt with bows. They have to, they're tactical about it. It's great. Dick Cheney is a fucking, morbidly obese 70-year-old that gets into a fucking Jeep. And like the one thing he's got to do is just have somebody be like, dude, Bill, can you drive over there so I can fucking shoot that thing? And all he needs to do is just not shoot the guy he's with. The only other thing in the woods that's not an animal. And what does he do? He turns around and he fucking shoots the guy that's with him in the Jeep. Like, you dumb motherfucker, right? Like, you are giving hunters a very bad name. So anyway, this is like, remember Plaxico Burress, the football player?
He shot himself in the leg.
He shot himself in the leg. It's like, you stupid motherfucker. The only thing you have to do is just catch footballs and make $40 million a year. The only assets you have to protect are your legs and your arms and your hands and your body. That's it. You protect those like 5 things and you're great. What does he do? He puts a fucking loaded pistol into a pair of sweatpants and walks into a Ruth Chris steakhouse and he orders an appetizer and shoots himself in the leg. It's like, you guys are doing a disservice to the Second Amendment. But anyways, so the point is, the last 3-4 years now, last 3-4 months, we're really seeing why the Second Amendment is such a big deal. Because, look, I'm armed here. I've never fired a gun outside of a range ever. I have several guns. I have plenty of ammunition, and I hope to never use them. But I tell you what, fucked if I'm going to let a group of people show up at my house and invite themselves inside when I didn't invite them. I'm a very inviting person. Jake, you show up tomorrow, you knock on the door. Hello, you want to come in? Yes, let's have a brandy. Great, you ask permission. Everybody's happy. But 25 people I don't know show up on my front lawn. Fuck yeah, I'm going to be out there with a gun. Like, sorry, but you're not coming in. I worked my whole life for this house here, my 1,200 square foot palace. You're not coming in without my permission. So maybe some people over the last 3-4 months have understood why the Second Amendment is important. Even people that may have advocated against it. I know that gun sales amongst Democrats I saw have gone up significantly. So maybe some people are getting it. Regardless, I think heading into November, things are going to continue to stay volatile. I think that we're going to have a lot of good tailwinds in terms of the coronavirus. So I think that, we have almost 100 vaccine candidates in various stages of clinical trials. I think that we're going to be getting just more good news on the coronavirus as we go forward. The amount of testing that we're doing, the amount of raw data that we're getting is showing that the infection fatality rate is significantly lower than we first estimated, which is great news. I think we're going to continue to get positive news on therapeutics and on vaccines. I think by January of next year, I think the coronavirus will almost be completely forgotten about. I think it will be. I mean,
I think it'll forget about it the day after the election. I'm worried about them revamping saying flu season right before the elections. The
election's going to be interesting, man. I'm more interested in the debates than I am in the outcome of the election, because Biden can't really get a sentence out.
Yeah.
And Trump is fucking Trump, so the debate should be very interesting.
Dude, it's going to be so interesting.
It really is. I mean, look, you can say about Trump, whether you love him or you hate him, that man bludgeoned his way through those debates in 2016, dude. He walked in there with no facts, okay, and no like tangible fucking like truth on his side, and he just took a fucking baseball bat and just clubbed people on that stage until there was nobody left. He insulted them and belittled them and just ridiculed them and I think he got some things right, but I think he was just like a steamroller. I mean, and you can say what you want about him, whether you agree with his policies or not, but like, the dude's up at like fucking 5 a.m. and he's up tweeting at 2 a.m. He sleeps like 3-4 hours a night. He's got like unlimited energy. And, Biden is, I don't know. He seems to really be having some cognitive issues, if you ask me. Obviously, I'm not a neurologist, but so I don't really know what's going to happen. All I know is no matter who wins, there's going to be a group of people in the U.S. that are not happy. And I think that's going to manifest in a worse way now than it would have 4 years ago, because of all the stuff that's happened over the last 2-3 months, where essentially the media and Democratic politicians have given rioters, looters, and protesters a pass and said that that's okay. It's okay for that to happen. It's okay to go out and destroy private property and steal people's things and assault shop owners and all these things that are happening. And I think
kill shop owners.
Yep, I think people are going to feel empowered that they can do the same thing in November.
The right is now empowered and justified if the right loses and the left wins. The right is now going to and I'm pretty much a George Carlin, both parties are an illusion guy, and so I say this without having a super strong emotional attachment to either. That if the left wins, the right is going to say, you guys didn't even condemn the people burning down businesses in my city. Now we're going to riot. And we already know what's going to happen if the right wins. The left is going to go 5,000 times more insane.
I think you're 100% right.
Yeah. So that concerns me. So let's kind of talk in conclusion here. First of all, what's one thing that you are grateful for in your life right now or excited about right now in life? And I just say that because it's easy to forget about all that stuff, especially when we talk about such heavy shit. What's one thing in your life you're enjoying right now?
Well, the pandemic has reminded me to call my parents and speak to them more often. So I've been talking to them almost daily, if not, every other day, which is more often than I was speaking to them prior to the pandemic. Unfortunately, I haven't seen them in person since the pandemic started, which sucks. But I'm happy to speak to them more. I have outside of Quote the Raven, I do research. So I do work a full-time job, and I have a person that I work for who's a person of integrity and a person of character who I just am exceptionally appreciative for. I have a couple of really great friends in my life. I have a relatively small circle. I'm not a guy that needs to go out and have fucking 200 friends. I find that annoying, and most of them don't give a shit about you anyways. I have like 2 or 3 really close friends that I enjoy seeing and talking and spending time with. So I'm exceptionally grateful for them. And I am, I'm part mystified and just exceptionally humbled by the amount of people that continue to reach out to me and offer support and, just have a dialogue with me about the things that I talk about, like yourself. That's really cool. I didn't think that would ever happen. So I'm very appreciative of that. And I do what I love. The podcast is me just talking to people that I find interesting. My Twitter feed is whatever's on my brain. It's cathartic. I just get it off my brain and I just shit it out to the internet, and then it just goes away and I don't have to think about it anymore. And, I have some wonderful people that I train jujitsu with. I love jujitsu. It is a huge part of my life. Mentally and physically, it does incredible things for me. I'm grateful that I have the health to go out and to exercise daily. I love to sweat. I love to work a sweat up. And that's it, man. I'm pretty much humbled and just grateful on a daily basis. I'm super stoked to be here. I'm happy to be alive. I am, I used to walk around years ago and be frightened of everything. And, I wasn't actually scared of everything, but I was frightened of the world because it didn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And over the last couple of years, I've kind of started to realize that there's things that I can change and things that I can't change, and things that I just, can accept because they are what they are. And I've done a lot of reading, read a lot of Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't know if you know who that is, the Buddhist monk.
Yeah, absolutely. He's got a monastery here in Southern California.
Of course he does.
Yeah.
And so guys like him that have really been able to deliver some profound messages to me on some deep shit. What's that?
Like what?
Well, there's a million things of his that he says that have helped me. Like, for instance, one is emotions are a stream, right? There's always one emotion coming after the one that you feel now. If you think about emotions, like it's a stream, so when you have a shit day, Jake, and you're depressed, and I get depressed, right? Or you're angry and I get angry. Or you feel like, I'm not where I want to be in the world. I haven't found the success that I need, or, my fucking neighbor's annoying, or whatever. I have a great neighbor, but it's just whatever. Whatever's pissing you off. It's a reminder that there's always a different emotion coming, to kind of accept that one and then to let it pass and to just feel it, to feel your anger, feel your depression, whatever. Understand that that's part of a long line of emotions that you'll feel throughout your entire life, and that another one will eventually be on its way. Just to be more accepting of things like that. Just mindfulness in general. Stupid things. I eat my food slower. I focus on doing one thing at a time instead of multitasking, so that I can give my attention to things. When I'm having a conversation with somebody that is a friend of mine, or I'm in person, I try to actually offer my presence up to them and really listen to them, and not just monopolize the conversation, which is kind of what I did today and what I've done in the past. Is just kind of a character flaw of mine.
It's not a character flaw. That's the point of the interview. I'm basically, instead of titling it interview request, I should title it "Want to Monopolize All the Knowledge in Your Head." Because that's basically what it is to learn from you. So it's not, I wouldn't call it a character flaw.
I'm just very thankful and humbled in general.
Yeah, that's, I think the reason I asked that, and then I kind of wanted to stab into it a little more in conclusion, is just that, especially, the people that really know what's going on in the world and the monetary policy, it can make you be very angry. And that's what led me to personal development. When I learned all this stuff as a freshman in college, I was so pissed off, and I hated everyone, and I was so mad about the world, and I was miserable. I was unhappy. And then I found a book by Eckhart Tolle, and then it kind of led me down meditation and personal development. And I realized at the core, the way for me to change the world wasn't to just get as mad as I possibly could if anything, that was keeping me in the control matrix and keeping
Right.
me on that level of consciousness of anger and control.
Right.
And changing myself, and these things were so important. And it sounds like from Thich Nhat Hanh, you learned to just kind of not be so attached to the emotions and anger of the world.
It's like Dan Harris says, you can't unclench your fist by thinking, I gotta unclench my fist. I gotta unclench my fist. You just have to acknowledge that your fist is clenched, and then eventually it will unclench itself, man. And meditation does beautiful things, man. Just for me, meditation, exercise, and I don't know if it's my biochemistry, the way that it is normally. I've been diagnosed with panic disorder and general anxiety disorder and attention deficit disorder. I mean, you name it, and I've been diagnosed it. But for me, when I meditate or when I exercise, I feel like somebody has flipped a switch in my biochemistry. Like I'm a very different person when I'm in fight or flight mode versus when I'm in a calm state of mind. My entire line of thinking changes on everything. And so meditation has been interesting because exercise used to be the only way I knew how to get to that calm state of mind, by going out and just literally wearing myself out. And then when I learned to meditate, and if you meditate, it's a lifelong learning experience. Nobody sits down and fucking, as Dan Harris says, hurls themselves into the lotus position and all of a sudden is just meditating properly on day one. Like, you have to figure out what it is that you're doing and what meditation is, and how to focus on your breath or whatever it is that you focus on that allows you to unwind. But it's one of those things where it's a different tool for kind of getting out of the state of mind that I was usually in and getting into a calm state of mind, which for me has been crucial in learning this kind of acceptance of everything, and not flipping out about things that I can't change, like this alien thing that's happened over the last couple of days.
I interviewed Dr. Stephen Greer.
Well, I'm not super impressed by Stephen Greer, but that's a different story. But
he talks about them releasing this stuff.
Well, let's just say this. If it was 3 or 4 years ago when this shit came out, like, all right, the Pentagon is going to admit that this craft is otherworldly, which, I mean, obviously it is. Did you see the fucking video? You see the Nimitz video, right? Like, that's not how propulsion works on Earth right now.
Right.
3, 4 years ago, I would be losing my mind. I mean, I would get out of bed in the morning and I would worry about an asteroid hitting the Earth from the time I got up until the time I went to bed. That's how occupied my mind was with panic on a daily basis.
So mindfulness really changed your life.
Totally, man. Yeah. I would be having nightmares about this, and now I realize it's out of my control. So what the fuck am I going to worry about it for?
Yeah, I'm glad we kind of ended there, because it is really important. I mean, I know from diving into this, can wreck your emotional life. And then it also wrecks your ability to even make positive change in the world. And my dad and I were having this conversation. My dad spends all waking hours of the day, studying everything he can find, whether it's about the Fed or conspiracies. And it gets to a point where he's just, and I know from the same, it just wears you out,
Yep.
So I think that's a great way for everyone to end. I wish, how like when you're on your cell phone and how like you get an alert, an Amber Alert, and it's like red Nissan might have stolen a child. I wish we got like Amber Alerts that were like, everybody, let's remember to take one breath real quickly here all together. Cause I think our biggest problem is we're such a reaction. The reactionary living from emotions are just driving us to levels that are creating a lot more problems. So I'm glad we ended that way.
That's why people who pray, that's why there's scientific benefits to prayer. It's not because, science says that you're talking directly to Jesus Christ. It's because science says that just stopping and dropping your shoulders for a second and giving thanks and being humble and focusing on that and kind of putting faith that, there are things out there that are out of your control is exceptionally healthy. It's like acupuncture is another good example, right? I used to go to acupuncture back in the day when I was having stomach problems that I couldn't figure out. And I loved it. It did great things for me, but I came out of it convinced that it didn't have anything to do with the needles and had way more to do with the fact that I was being forced to lie on a table and not move for an hour with a nice warm light on me that made me feel, there's some deep, first off, you're calming your mind. You're forced to get your breath under control because you're just laying there eventually. And, that light, I'm sure there's some evolutionary psychology to, like that's what it was like in the fetus or something before you worried about the economy. Back when you were a fetus, rather, back when you were, in your mom's belly before you knew how fucked up the world was. It's just so exceptionally healthy. Every once in a while before I eat, I'll take, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and I'll take a deep breath. I'll try to drop my shoulders. I need it. If you listen to me this entire podcast, I get worked up and I have a problem where I think quickly and I have trouble getting it out of my mouth. Sometimes like I get more in my head that I can get out of my mouth in the right way. So a lot kind of gets left behind and that is annoying. And then I start analyzing myself while I'm talking and it's a huge clusterfuck. But it's so healthy. It's so healthy for people to just try to achieve a calm state of mind, however they can get there.
All right. I love it. That's a great way to end for all of us to take a couple breaths here as we're finishing the podcast and maybe passing that on to some more people. I think it would make our world, we'd have a lot more unity and empathy and understanding if we could slow down like that. So I think that's a great way to end.
I agree.
Appreciate your work, appreciate what you're doing. And man, I know it's Sunday and you got your stuff going on and really appreciate that. Was fantastic. Hope we could do it again and talk a little bit more. There's 9 million things that I'd love.
There's a million different things we could have just went deep on there. So let's do it again anytime. And I'm really grateful that you reached out, man, and want to have me on. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.